Hello and welcome back to Diplomacy and Discourse. I'm your host AR and I'm glad you're here for what I think is one of the most important episodes yet. Today, we're talking about something that affects every policy decision on the planet, but rarely gets explained clearly. We're talking about complexity. Specifically, why modern problems refuse to stay in neat boxes, why simple fixes so often backfire, and what smart policymakers are doing differently when they embrace the messiness instead of fighting it. Here's the core idea. The biggest challenges we face, climate change, poverty, conflict, public health, education, are not separate problems with separate solutions. They are tangled together. Pull on one thread and you move 10 others. Ignore that reality, and your well-intentioned policy can make things worse. Understand it, and you unlock solutions that work across multiple domains at once. This isn't abstract theory. I'm going to show you exactly how this plays out in the real world. From Afghanistan to Mexico, from Colombia to Thailand, from the Philippines to the halls of the United Nations. We'll look at spectacular failures and surprising successes. And along the way, I'll give you frameworks and tools you can use to think about policy, and honestly, about life, in a more connected, realistic way. Let's get into it. Let's start with the basics, because this concept is genuinely powerful once you grasp it. Traditional policymaking works on a simple assumption. Identify a problem, design a solution, implement it, done. It's linear. A causes B. Fix A, and B goes away. Complexity theory says, not so fast. In the real world, problems exist inside systems. Webs of interacting parts where everything affects everything else. And these systems have three properties that make them fundamentally different from simple cause and effect chains. The first, interconnection. What happens in education affects health. What happens in health affects the economy. What happens in the economy affects security. These aren't separate domains. They are one system viewed through different lenses. The second is feedback loops. Today's policy becomes tomorrow's input. A subsidy changes behavior. Changed behavior changes markets. Changed markets change politics. The policy doesn't just act on the system acts back on the policy. Some feedback loops amplify effects. We call those positive loops. Others dampen or stabilize effects. Those are negative loops. Both are powerful and both can surprise you. Third, emergence and non-linearity. Small changes can cascade into huge effects. Big investments can produce nothing. A single undersea cable cut near Alexandria in 2008 disrupted entire economies across the Middle East and India. One physical node affecting a global digital system. That's nonlinearity in action. Here's why this matters for policy. When you treat a complex problem as if it were a simple one, when you assume your tax cut will only affect taxes, or your ceasefire will only affect fighting, you're almost guaranteed to be surprised. And those surprises are often worse than the original problem. The good news is that complexity theory doesn't just describe the problem. It gives us tools to work with. And that's what the rest of this episode is about. Let me introduce a term that will change how you think about policy challenges. Wicked problems. A wicked problem is not just a hard problem. It's a problem with no clear definition, no single right answer, and no way to test solutions without changing the system itself. Every attempt at a solution reveals new dimensions of the problem. Climate change is a wicked problem. Poverty is a wicked problem. Conflict resolution, as we've discussed in previous episodes, is a wicked problem. Let me show you what this looks like in practice with two very different cases from 2026. The first is Afghanistan. What's happening there right now is a textbook cascading wicked problem, where interventions in one domain ripple destructively across every other domain. Start with education. The Taliban has banned secondary and university education for over 2 million girls and women. That's horrific on its own, but watch how it cascades. Without education, girls have fewer life options. Child marriage rates have climbed to 39%, up from 33% in 2016. And the UN projects a 25% further increase by 2026. Early marriage leads to early childbearing, and a UN analysis projects that early childbearing will rise by 45%, with maternal mortality increasing by up to 50%. But it gets worse. Restricting women from studying medicine means fewer female healthcare providers, which in a society where many women can only see female doctors means less access to the very healthcare system that could mitigate the maternal harm. Meanwhile, a March 2026 decree permits husbands to beat their wives as long as it doesn't break bones or leave open wounds. The UN Human Rights Chief described it as legitimizing violence against women and children and reminiscent of apartheid. So do you see the knot now? Education, health, gender rights, economic opportunity, and legal protection are all tangled together. You can't solve any one of them in isolation. Pull on the education strand without addressing the others, and the knot tightens. That's a wicked problem. Now let's look at a very different case, Colombia's Total Peace Initiative. President Petro had an ambitious idea: negotiate simultaneously with all remaining armed groups instead of tackling them one at a time. The logic seemed sound. Address all sources of violence at once. And in one sense, it worked. Direct clashes between state forces and armed groups decreased. But the reduction in military pressure created a vacuum. Groups like the ELN exploited it, expanding their territorial control and illicit economies. Intergroup violence actually increased. In January 2025, clashes between the ELN and FARC dissidents in the Catatumbo region displaced approximately 80,000 people. By June 2025, 66% of Colombians believed the strategy was moving in the wrong direction, and 85% felt security was worsening. Analysts now argue that a regionalized partial peace approach, tailored to local dynamics rather than imposed as a single national framework, may work better. The lesson from both cases is the same. When you treat a wicked problem as if it were a simple, linear one, you generate feedback loops and unintended consequences that can dwarf the original problem. So, if simple, siloed approaches don't work for complex problems, what does? Let me lay out a framework that contrasts two approaches, and you'll see versions of this playing out in every policy domain on Earth. The siloed model treats each problem as belonging to one department. Health problems go to the health ministry. Education problems go to education. Security goes to defense. Each ministry designs its own solution, measures its own outputs, and rarely talks to the others. It's neat, it's bureaucratic, and it fails spectacularly when problems don't respect departmental boundaries, which, in the real world, they never do. The integrated model starts from the opposite assumption. Problems are interconnected, so solutions must be too. It uses standing cross-sector coordination bodies instead of ad hoc meetings. It monitors feedback loops continuously instead of reacting after things go wrong. It co-designs solutions with affected communities instead of delivering them top-down. And it measures outcomes: trust, resilience, social cohesion, not just outputs like units delivered or dollars spent. The difference between these approaches isn't just academic. It's the difference between policies that work and policies that create new problems. Let me show you what integration looks like in practice. One of the most creative examples of integrated policymaking in 2026 is happening around something you might not expect: soccer. Mexico is hosting the 2026 FIFA World Cup alongside the United States and Canada. But rather than treating it as just a sporting event, Mexico has formalized a national coordinating body that spans federal, state, and municipal governments, plus coordination with US and Canadian counterparts, like handling migration, security, mobility, health, and tourism as a single integrated system. President Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo framed it as a social World Cup, one that reaches beyond stadiums into community sports spaces, and the programs backing that vision are genuinely cross-sectoral. Quote-unquote, love the game, promotes gender equity through soccer. Quote, soccer for all, end quote, targets youth violence prevention. Kickoff to financial freedom, bundles financial literacy with sports participation. Get on the bus, trains over 1,000 security personnel in English language skills. Small business incubation programs use the World Cup as a catalyst for local entrepreneurship. This is what it looks like when a government takes a single event and designs it as a multi-purpose development platform. Migration policy, security coordination, economic development, gender equity, and youth engagement, all running through one integrated framework instead of 6 separate bureaucracies. It's not perfect. No integrated approach ever is. But it's a world apart from the siloed model where the sports ministry handles the games, the security ministry handles the crowds, and nobody talks to each other until something goes wrong. Now let's go deeper into one of the most important concepts in complexity theory: feedback loops. A feedback loop is simply this: the outcome of a system becomes its own input. Your policy changes behavior. Changed behavior changes the environment. The changed environment changes what your policy needs to do next. Feedback loops can be positive, meaning they amplify effects, or negative, meaning they dampen and stabilize. Neither is inherently good or bad. The key is recognizing which loops are operating and whether you want to amplify them or break them. So let me give you 3 concrete examples. First, a destructive feedback loop: fossil fuel subsidies. Governments subsidize fossil fuels to keep energy affordable. Lower prices increase consumption. Higher consumption increases emissions. Higher emissions increase climate change. Climate damage increases costs. But the subsidies make it politically harder to transition away from fossil fuels, locking in the very consumption patterns the climate regime is trying to break. Fossil fuel subsidies fell to $1.1 trillion in 2023, down from $1.68 trillion in 2022. But they remain roughly 3 times pre-COVID levels. That's a negative feedback loop that policy needs to break, not reinforce. Second is a positive feedback loop by design: Thailand's creative economy strategy. The Thai government identified that cultural exports, such as television dramas, pop music, food, film tourism, could be deliberately engineered into a growth loop. Popular TV shows attract tourists. Tourists spend money. Revenue funds more production. Better production attracts global audiences. Global audiences drive language enrollment, brand partnerships, and export earnings. The numbers are striking. HBO's The White Lotus, filming in Thailand, is projected to boost tourism by 20%. Stars from Thailand's globally popular BL drama series generated $106 million in earned media value in 2023 through luxury brand partnerships alone. The government's One Family, One Soft Power initiative aims to create 20 million skilled creative workers and generate 4 trillion baht in revenue. That's a feedback loop deliberately engineered for positive cascading effects. Third, a feedback loop with unintended consequences. Digital diplomacy. Social media has become a primary tool for public diplomacy and crisis communication. Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has used X and Instagram effectively to mobilize international support and counter disinformation. But the same platform produces unintended escalation. Poorly worded diplomatic tweets between Iranian and American accounts have sharpened hostilities rather than easing them. And the digital infrastructure itself has become a new arena of geopolitical competition. Over 70 countries have opened diplomatic offices in Silicon Valley, recognizing that tech firms now hold market values exceeding many nations' GDPs. The unintended consequence, traditional diplomatic geography, is being redrawn around private platforms whose governance no foreign ministry controls. The takeaway: feedback loops are the hidden engine of policy. If you don't see them, they'll surprise you. If you understand them, they become your most powerful tool. Let me walk you now through several more cases where integrated, complexity-aware policymaking is either succeeding or struggling, because both kinds of stories teach us something important. First, you've already heard this before, the Bangsamoro region in the Philippines. The first ever parliamentary elections in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao are scheduled for September 2026. This is the political capstone of the 2014 peace agreement. But making it work requires simultaneous coordination across the Elections Commission, the Office of the President Advisor on Peace, the Armed Forces, which have deployed 5 joint task forces, the National Police with 9,000 officers, and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, plus redistricting law revisions to satisfy a Supreme Court ruling. That's an integrated security political legal architecture, and it's fragile. When the Peace Office was perceived as interfering in government appointments without proper consultation in late 2025, the MILF declared a loss of trust, demonstrating that integration depends on procedural legitimacy, not just structural design. Process is policy. How you coordinate matters as much as what you coordinate. Second, the UN Peacebuilding Fund. The PBF has invested over $1.3 billion in nearly 700 projects across countries hosting UN peace operations. Its explicit purpose is to bridge operational, programmatic, and financial gaps when peacekeeping missions draw down, because history has shown that when missions leave without integrated transition planning, security vacuums open up. The exit of the UNAMID from Sudan is a cautionary example. Armed groups exploited the vacuum. In November 2025, twin resolutions strengthened cooperation between the Security Council and the Peacebuilding Commission. Institutional plumbing designed to prevent exactly that kind of silo failure. Third, the IGAD Mediation Reflection Conference in Nairobi in April 2026. The Intergovernmental Authority on Development brought together African mediators and called for what they termed a strategic ecosystem mediation model. The diagnosis was blunt. Fragmented initiatives and militarized responses have overshadowed political solutions in eastern Congo and the Sahel. The prescription: integration across mediation, climate security, early warning, and human rights. Formalized in a 4-year AU-UN program starting in 2026. The African Union acts as a convener. The UN provides technical and normative support, and regional bodies anchor implementation. This is systems thinking applied to the architecture of peacemaking itself, recognizing that mediation, climate policy, and human rights monitoring are not separate activities, but interconnected parts of one system. Fourth, local first. Local first peacebuilding through Peace Direct. In 2025, Peace Direct supported 76 local peacebuilding organizations across 33 countries. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, an organization called FOCHI established 76 peace courts and 3 super peace courts with 30 mediators, resolving 17 collective conflicts affecting 6,900 households. In Sudan, youth-led emergency response rooms fed 12,000 people daily, integrating displaced and host communities in setting priorities, reducing the tensions that poorly coordinated aid typically generates. The insight: over 80% of effective peacebuilding is now done by non-credentialed actors, such as athletes, coaches, faith leaders, citizens. Integration doesn't just mean connecting government departments. It means connecting formal institutions with the informal networks that actually holds communities together. Here's something many people don't realize. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are themselves a complexity model. 17 goals, 169 targets, deliberately interlinked. SDG 12, Responsible Consumption and Production, is described as a central enabler, with explicit connections to climate action, ocean health, life on land, clear water, and decent work. When the world misses one goal, it tends to miss on several, because they are part of the same system. And right now, the world is missing on most of them. The numbers tell a sobering story. Nearly 2.3 billion people face food insecurity. Over 2 billion lack safely managed drinking water. 666 million lack electricity. Global inequality saw its sharpest increase in decades during the pandemic. Global temperatures likely crossed the 1.5 degree threshold in 2024. CO2 emissions hit a record the same year. Meanwhile, the financing gap is enormous. The climate finance goal agreed at COP29 is at least $300 billion every year by 2035, scaling to $1.3 trillion, triple the previous target. But the international financial support for clean energy in developing countries was only $21.6 billion in 2023, against estimated needs of $4.2 to $4.5 trillion annually by 2030. These aren't just development statistics. They are complexity in action. Insufficient climate mitigation drives higher adaptation costs, which strain the same developing country budgets that need to fund mitigation. That's a feedback loop. education bans reduce economic participation, which deepens poverty, which increases child marriage, which reduces the next generation's education. That's another feedback loop. And no single ministry, no single goal, no single intervention can break these loops alone. The SDG framework's genius is that it recognizes this interconnection by design. Its weakness is that most governments still implement it through siloed ministries that don't talk to each other. So if you're a policymaker or a citizen trying to evaluate policy, how do you actually work with complexity instead of against it? Let me share you some practical tools and frameworks. Adaptive management. Instead of designing a policy, implementing it, and hoping for the best, adaptive management builds in continuous monitoring and adjustment. You launch, you observe, you learn, you adjust. The Netherlands does this brilliantly with water management. Their Room for the River project doesn't just build higher dikes. It creates space for rivers to flood safely and continuously adjusts based on new climate data. It treats water management as a living system, not a one-time engineering problem. Scenario planning. Rather than predicting a single future, scenario planning explores multiple possible futures and develops strategies that work across a range of them. Singapore's Urban Redevelopment Authority uses this approach, exploring different urban development scenarios to create flexible strategies that adapt to various possible futures. It's why Singapore has maintained its status as a global city while managing sustainability in one of the world's most densely populated places. Pilot programs and iterative design. Instead of rolling out a national policy based on theory alone, test it in one area first. Observe the feedback loops. Adjust, then scale. Finland's education system exemplifies this. Regular small-scale testing of new curricula and teaching methods with adjustments based on real feedback from teachers and students before broader implementation. Regular small-scale testing of new curricula and teaching methods with adjustments based on real feedback from teachers and students before broader implementation. Stakeholder co-design. Bring diverse perspectives into policy creation, not just for buy-in, but because different stakeholders see different parts of the system. The Peace Direct model in Congo and Sudan shows this. Local communities designing their own conflict resolution mechanisms because they understand the system's dynamics better than any external expert could. Cross-sector coordination bodies. Create standing institutions whose job is to connect the dots across departments. Mexico's World Cup coordinating body is one example. The UN Peacebuilding Commission is another. IGAD's ecosystem mediation model is a third. The key is making coordination permanent, not ad hoc. Network analysis. Map the relationships and interactions within a system to find leverage points, the places where small interventions can produce outsized effects. In healthcare, network analysis can identify the key influencers within health systems, enabling targeted interventions that improve the whole network's efficiency. And finally, a tool so simple it's easy to overlook: process design. The third story approach from Harvard's program on negotiation reduces defensiveness by framing a conflict from a neutral third-party perspective. Senator Susan Collins' talking stick during the 2018 government shutdown imposed a simple rule. Only the person holding the stick could speak, and it restored order to chaotic bipartisan negotiations. Sometimes, the most powerful tool for managing complexity is a better conversation structure. Now I want to be honest about something that complexity thinking forces you to confront. Trade-offs. In a connected system, almost every policy choice involves trade-offs, and the honest ones are rarely discussed publicly. Take energy. 666 million people lack electricity. 2.1 billion lack clean cooking fuels. Renewables reached only about 18% of total final energy consumption in 2022. The trade-off is real. Do you prioritize grid extension, which is slower but more equitable? Or off-grid solar, which is faster but could leave 41% of unserved populations on lower quality systems? Neither alone is sufficient. Both are needed. But resource allocation between them is a genuine tension. Take peace processes. Israel and Lebanon entered direct talks in April 2026 for the first time since 1983. The integrated agenda covers Hezbollah disarmament, Lebanese armed forces deployment, financial support for the LAF, and ceasefire enforcement, recognizing that any of these isolation would fail. But Hezbollah's parliamentary opposition and ongoing Iran tensions mean that integration is necessary but not sufficient. The fragility is built into the interconnection. Take Yemen. UN Special Envoy Hans Grunberg has framed his 2026 approach as explicitly systems-based. Political, economic, and security tracks must move, quote, in tandem without making progress in one area contingent on another, end quote. A May 2026 agreement released over 1,600 conflict-related detainees. But 22 million Yemenis, half the population, need humanitarian assistance. 18 million are food insecure, and 73 UN staff are held incommunicado. The integrated approach is right. The scale of the challenge is staggering. Complexity thinking doesn't make trade-offs disappear. It makes them visible. And visible trade-offs, honestly discussed, leads to better decisions than hidden ones. Before we close, let me give you 3 mental models you can carry with you. 3 ways to evaluate any policy through a complexity lens. The first, the knot metaphor. Think of wicked problems as knots. Pulling on one strand without attending to the others tightens the whole knot. Afghanistan shows what happens when you tighten the knot. Education, healthcare, gender, economy, and legal protection all pulling against each other. Mexico's World Cup approach and Thailand's creative economy shows what happens when you loosen multiple strands at once. Integration that creates positive cascading effects. Second, feedback loops are policy levers. Feedback loops are policy levers. Every policy creates feedback. The question is whether you are amplifying the right loops and dampening the wrong ones. Fossil fuel subsidies amplify consumption. Thailand's cultural exports amplify growth. Colombia's total peace inadvertently amplified intergroup competition. The policymaker's craft is seeing the loops before they surprise you. And the third, legitimacy is procedural, not just substantive. Bangsamoros stalled trust when process wasn't respected. The African Union's call for a unified mediation framework, Hezbollah's rejection of talks it wasn't consulted on, these all show that getting the structure right isn't enough. How you build it, who you include, and whether the process feels fair matters as much as the policy content itself. So what's the big takeaway? The world's biggest problems are not separate problems. They are interconnected systems. And the policies that work, the ones that actually improve lives, are the ones designed with that interconnection in mind. This doesn't mean every policy has to solve everything at once. It means every policy should be designed with awareness of what it touches, what feedback loops it creates, and what unintended consequences it might trigger. It means building in flexibility, monitoring, and the humility to adjust when reality surprises you, because in complex systems, it always will. In 2026, we are seeing this understanding take root in places you might not expect. In Mexico's soccer as development strategy, in the Philippines' layered peace architecture, in the African Union's ecosystem mediation model, in Thailand's deliberately engineered cultural feedback loops, in local Peace Corps in Congo, and youth-led kitchens in Sudan. None of these are perfect. All of them are messy, contested, and incomplete. But they represent something important, a growing recognition that the area of simple fixes for complex problems is over. The future belongs to policymakers and citizens who can think in systems, embrace uncertainty, and build solutions as interconnected as the problems they face. If you take one thing from this episode, let it be this. Complexity is not the enemy of good policy. It's the reality that good policy must be built on. Thank you for listening. If this episode shifted how you think about the world, share it with someone, leave a review, and send your thoughts to diplomacyandiscourse@gmail.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep thinking in systems.